everyone. Welcome back to the Growth Signal, where we are rethinking the future of customer relationships, how we build them, how we keep them, and how we continue to lead as those expectations rapidly evolve. My name is Alyssa Nolte,
And I'm Philippa Gamse.
and we are going to have an incredible conversation. So, Philippa, tell us, what is your hot take?
Yes, hi, good morning, Alyssa. So, I've just written a new book called Website Wealth, a business leader's guide to driving real value from your analytics. And my take is that if you're not really effectively using your analytics, and that means a whole lot more than just how many visitors did we get last week, then you're flying blind actually with everything that you're doing with your marketing, because you actually have no idea whether or not it's working. And people come to me and they say, yeah, but we get decent sales off of the website. But that still doesn't tell you how many sales you're missing out on, how many people have taken one look at what you've got and walked away, even though they could be good prospects for you. And it's interesting that a couple of reports have come out in the last few months where up to a quarter of businesses actually admit that they're still not really using analytics, which is stunning to me. And of the ones that are, um, again, about a quarter say that they kind of look at them, but they really don't really know what they're doing. And honestly, my hot take, as I said, is in this day and age, I just don't think that's good enough, because I think, as I said, you're flying blind, you don't know what you're doing, and you really should.
I work with companies all the time who hear from some consultant that they need to be more data driven. And when they hear that, they say to themselves, okay, we will collect all of the data imaginable. And then they vacuum
Right.
in all of this stuff.
Yep.
And it either just like gets vacuumed in and sits on the shelf, or it's super dirty data. Like it's not good, it's not properly formatted, it's unuseful in that way. And so then they either go another direction where they use dirty data and it doesn't actually tell them anything,
Right. Garbage
or
in,
they
garbage out. Yeah.
exactly, or they
Yep.
try to clean that data and have clean data. But I would love your opinion. My hypothesis is that not all data is good data, and not all good data is relevant data.
Okay. So Albert Einstein had a great quote, which I always use when I'm teaching. And I can't remember which way around these two things go, but basically what he said was, not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts.
Oh my
Right.
god,
Which
that
is,
is like the
it's
perfect
fantastic.
encapsulation of that.
Exactly. I love it. So I use it a lot. And absolutely. And yes, I've met people who measure absolutely everything they possibly can get their hands on. Whether or not it's good is another issue, but they measure everything they can get. And you can't do anything with that, because you can't focus. What are you going to do? To me, you should only measure anything if you're going to do something about it, because otherwise
Yes.
you're just stroking your ego or not stroking your ego, depending on the number, right? Um, But at some point in my career, I actually taught. I was so honored. I actually got to teach alongside Avinash Kaushik, who wrote like the seminal book on web analytics called Analytics 2.0. That is still on the Amazon bestseller list, even though it first came out in 2009, because it talks about how to approach this whole thing, right? And I learned a lot from Avinash. And one of the things that he did that I now use is to create a measurement model which focuses on no more than about 9 KPIs, 9 metrics. And those 9 metrics are spread across the customer journey. So from acquisition through, the behavior consideration stage, and then obviously onto purchase. And and no more than sort of 2 or 3 in each area, because what you're saying is, here's the thing that I want to focus on today, now, in this aspect of my customer journey, so that I can try to optimize it, test it, try to do it better, right? And the behavior piece is really important to include, because in my experience, again, people do tend to focus on acquisition, like how do you get traffic? Because especially if they're paying for advertising and stuff like that. And obviously they focus on the end result, which is how much money I'm making. But a lot of time they just let go the bit in the middle, because given that, very few customers come to your website ready to buy most of the time, right? What they do, or the experience they have when they get to your site, is really important. That's the behavior part. Do they watch your videos? Do they sign up for your newsletter, right? Do they read your blog post, whatever it might be? And people don't think about that as part of the important part of the nature, the relationship that you got to nurture. Um, so sorry, long answer to question, but yeah, focusing on, and those KPIs can change. So you solve something, you're happy with how it's performing, you move on to the next thing. But having a really focused idea of what you're measuring for and why is absolutely key.
I want to talk about the 9 KPIs, right? Because I am going to make a bold prediction here, and that the 9 KPIs are not the same from company to company. We can't say these are the magic 9. So,
Absolutely.
how do I figure out what are my magic 9 when, my business has, a different atmosphere, a different customer, a different value proposition, all of those things that make my business unique and differentiated? How do I find my magic 9?
Right. And I should say that 9 is not the magic number. I mean, so what I'm saying is there are quadrants. There's these 3 segments, and there's also actually retention if you want to add that.
Mhm.
So what I'm actually saying is no more than 3, but 2 is fine. Um, but what you do with those KPIs, and then I'll answer your actual question, is that you add segments, and that's another area where people don't segment. So, if you're looking at how many people bought something, you want to segment out by what was the marketing channel that they came in on, or did they watch a particular video that really persuaded them? You want to dig deeper. You don't want to measure all your traffic in one kind of conglomerate mass. So it's 9 or fewer KPIs plus relevant or appropriate segments for each KPI so that you can figure out different types of visitors doing different types of things.
Yeah.
And
Unfortunately, there's no, like, magic bullet for that either because I feel like that's a lot of tedious work that a lot of people are not necessarily willing to do, or they're intimidated by the sheer volume of having to dig through all of that data.
right, but so the point of my book's directed at business owners and decision makers, right? And my premise is, look, I and people like me can do that stuff. You don't have to do that stuff. What you do have to do is understand what it is you're looking for. So you understand your business. So you said, where do we start? What are those 9 KPIs, right? The answer to that is you've got to be thinking about your business and your strategies. You've got to know exactly what your website is trying to do, not just overall, but on every page. Every page of your site should have an outcome that you understand. Like, this page is supposed to get people to, I don't know, sign up for my newsletter. This page is supposed to get people to apply for a free trial, whatever it is, right? Um, or this page is simply supposed to get people to watch this video. Or but you've got to know what you're trying to get people to do, because if they don't do it, you're losing them. And it's amazing to me honestly, how many people I start a project with, and I ask these questions, and they honestly don't really know. And this is not about the data. This is about your business strategy. So, what are the goals and outcomes that you're looking for? What are not only the big goals, the purchases and so on, but the micro goals that nurture the relationship along the way, like watching content or signing up for a newsletter or whatever, right? Um, and what's most important to us today? And that's another really important question that will be different again for different businesses. And so a lot of times when I do these interviews, I get asked, Philippa, what are the metrics that every business should measure? And thankfully, you haven't asked me that question because you already know that that's not the right question. um, but that's the point that I always get to is, look, you've got to understand what it is that you're doing in your context, where your current bottlenecks might be, and look at it that way and start measuring those metrics to support those goals and those outcomes. Or if you know you've got a problem or you think you might have a problem, then you would be looking for those kinds of metrics. But you've really got to be into your business. And the data at this point doesn't matter, because that's the first question. Do you really understand your business and exactly what you're trying to do?
And it's really interesting. So I work on user experience research team. So we do like all of that behavior testing in the middle that you talked about. And one of our clients is this huge enterprise software, and they are like one of the biggest in the game. And they had us test their terms of service and legal page, like those boilerplate pages that we
Right.
all put in the footer of our website. And we're doing all of this testing, and like we're not a cheap company to work with. So why are they paying us so much money to test these
Mhm.
two pages in particular? And I asked someone that, and they said, "Oh, this is our best indication that we're about to close a deal because IT is on our terms of service and privacy policy and legal compliance pages, making sure that our software is going to be compliant with their end customer. And we found it's the best signal of a future sale. So we want to make sure
Wow.
that this is really tuned for those people. And I'm like going, right? Because my privacy policy on my website is just like a boilerplate thing I found on the
Exactly.
internet.
Right, right,
And that's true for most people. But
right.
they had uncovered that through tons and tons of research and analysis and data analytics and experimenting. And they figured out that in that messy middle that you talked about, terms and conditions, privacy policy, and the legalese pages were their best indicator of a KPI they wanted to track.
And I absolutely love that because it's an absolute proof of exactly what I'm saying, that they would never have known that if they hadn't dug into that data. Because, sometimes people, I think I say this in the beginning of the book, people will, you go to a party and people say, hi, what do you do? And you tell them and they say, oh, good. Could you take a look at my website for me? And the answer is no. I think not,
Yep.
A, because I don't, you're not paying me, but more than that, because honestly, it wouldn't do you any good. Because if I just look at your website, my opinion's as good as anybody else's and probably, maybe a bit more informed. But, the point being that this is all stuff that you can't tell just by looking at the site. You've got to get into the data and then you get these amazing insights.
And I think I do get that as well, like, right? Because we do eye tracking technology. So we have all
Right.
this tech of like what people are looking at. And they're like, oh, can you look at my website and tell me how to put it in order? And I always have to tell people, like, I totally could. But at the end of the day, I am not your customer and you are not
Right.
your customer. And we can all sit here and talk about what might happen. But if we don't know what's really happening, then it's just a waste of a conversation.
Right. And I think that also, I am not your customer is a great point. And so is you not your customer. And you're way too close to it to be able to figure out what's going on. Because I've had business owners say, I'll say, look, nobody clicks on this button, nobody knows it's there. It's hidden, it's whatever. And they'll say, but it's obvious, and I'll say, no, it's not obvious. You know it's there because you put it there, you designed the site, right? But somebody who's never seen the site before is clearly not seeing it because we can show that. And I love not only, and most of the time I work with something like Google Analytics, but I also work with a heat map screen recording tool, because that's important too, because that tells you stuff that data-driven metric analytics can't. I'm working with a big nonprofit organization in New York at the moment. And literally, I watched a screen recording yesterday where somebody came along and on the homepage, at the top of the homepage, there's a big red donate button. This is nonprofit, right? So donate, big deal, right? And they click the button and they get to a new page and that same button is in the same place, exactly the same button, and they click it again and nothing happens. The page doesn't refresh. It just goes into a loop because the button's broken. Now, in my experience, I don't know about you, but, you put up your website and stuff goes wrong after a bit. I don't know why. There are gremlins. There are definite gremlins, right? And of course, the analytics on their own would never tell us that button is now dead. But watching that screen recording and this person who's doing your number one thing because they want to donate to this nonprofit and they can't, right there is like, boom, right?
Well, and it might not even be that the button's broken, right? Like if they clicked on that button and then they tried to click on the same button again, clearly they didn't get what they were looking for the first time they clicked on it.
Yeah,
So
no, in this case,
what was missing?
yeah, no, the link something had
Oh,
happened
it
to the link.
fully broken. Oh my gosh, and your most
Yes,
important call to action is not working.
exactly. And the screen recording shows you that and nothing else, unless you're literally going to go through your website and click on every link every so often, which I don't know that many people would. So
No, I don't have time for that. And
yeah,
I'm a small company. I'm not even, a multi-thousand page website that some of these get to.
right.
So let's talk about, we talked about, what's the one step is to figure out what those KPIs are in your phases specific to you. But why do you think businesses struggle with this? Why is this something that we even have to have a podcast about when to you and me, this seems intuitive? What are we missing? Or
Right.
what are they missing?
But have you ever watched your clients' eyes glaze over as soon as you start talking about it?
I always tell people, I'm like, I work in research, but don't hold that against me. I swear I'm really fun at parties.
Right. Exactly. And that's I mean, I've been a speaker for a long time and I teach and, I know that when I speak about this stuff, I have to make it interesting, um, somehow. And, most of the time that's by making it really relevant, like telling really relevant stories, like the one I just told you, um, and making it fast and not overwhelming people with data. Because I think that's honestly, and, I know this because I know this applies to me in accounting, right? Like when my accountant does my tax return and every so often he wants to explain something to me and I say, no, 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 don't tell me anything. I just want to know, where do I sign? Do I owe anything? Whatever, right? Um, and I honestly think a lot of business owners, especially people with very entrepreneurial spirits, some of them are data driven, but a lot of them, this isn't something that they find exciting. And I get that. And if you look at the average analytics tool, I mean, I know that Google Analytics, which, for example, the previous version, as everybody says, was much better from an interface perspective. Everybody hates GA4.
I do. I
Um,
hate it so much.
I don't think that any marketers have ever at Google have ever been near it. I shouldn't say that, but I'm not sure that any UX people have been near it either. But um, and so if somebody who doesn't know what they're doing just pulls it up, I mean, it's crazy. It's overwhelming. It's just numbers. Who knows what you're supposed to do with it? So I think it's really understandable that people don't want to deal with this stuff. And yet, as we're discussing, the value of it can be absolutely huge. But again, to me, that's why I wrote the book I wrote, because it's all in English. I promise you, there's not a single chart or graph in the entire book. I stay away completely from terminology. Like you don't care what a custom dimension is, right? You don't need to know that. I do, but that's why I'm here. But from the business perspective, what do you need to know? What do you need to think about? Where could you be losing revenue? And also, I have a load of stories about where the insights give you ideas for new revenue sources, like new products or services or target markets. And again, in the course of my consulting, I found quite a few of those, and I've got quite a few of those as examples in the book because I think that's really important too. And again, it's stuff that you couldn't tell without looking at what's actually happening on the site.
I want to reconnect to something you mentioned earlier, and we kind of skipped right past it. I want to bring it back up to the front. You said that if you don't have a plan to do something with the data, then don't collect it, something to that effect. Let's talk a little bit more about that because I see that far too often. And I just read an article about survey responses and people are not responding to surveys anymore because they don't believe that anything will change. So why waste their time giving feedback?
Right.
And this perception of you have all this data at your fingertips, you could do something great with it. And to your hot take, like if you're not doing something with it, you're flying blind. But that doing something with it part is the part that a lot of people are missing. So how do we connect what we're seeing in the data to an actual action that makes a difference and changes the direction?
It's a great question. And I mean, maybe unfortunately, the answer to some extent is you need, then at that point, you need some good advice or somebody who's done this before. Um, but, once you know what's happening, so the reason not to measure absolutely everything is because you can't then focus on anything. So if you identify, for example, um, people are putting a load of stuff in their shopping carts and then they don't buy anything, right? So what could be the problem there? And I mean, the only thing you can do when you found out that you think there might be a problem is start digging and say, well, what are all the possible things that could be going wrong? Um, so if I've got loads of stuff in my shopping cart and people aren't, are people starting the checkout and then stopping at some point in the checkout? I mean, a classic is, when they find out the shipping fees or something.
Oh, that gets
Um,
me every time where it's like I buy
right.
a $20 pair of shoes, but the shipping is $40. I'm like, never mind.
Right, exactly. But, or did they want to be able to pay, in different countries, apparently, there are very different ways that people prefer to pay. So are you hitting that kind of thing if you're more global? What's going on? So identifying that there's an issue, and then you've got to walk down what could be the potential causes here. Now, again, as the business owner, you might have an idea of that you can give to your data person and say, check this out. so the data person can translate that into metrics and see if it's, if it's a hunch. But the more metrics that you have in there, that in some ways, the harder it is to figure out exactly which one changes when you do something different.
Yeah.
I literally once, as I say, I've also done a lot of teaching, and I had in my class a guy who was responsible for pay-per-click marketing at a major technology company that we've definitely heard of. Um, he told me that he was required to report 30 metrics, and this is just for pay-per-click marketing, right? 30 metrics. And it's like, and he thought it was crazy, but the powers that be said we want all these 30 metrics. And it's like, what are they doing with them? One of the things that when I teach master's class, what I like to tell my students is we talk about creating dashboards, but don't create the same dashboard for every executive in the company, right? The director of sales wants to know different things from the director of customer experience. So tell them what they need to know. Don't just throw a load of stuff at them that they're not going to look at. And one of my favorite sayings is, nobody has ever hired me and said, Philippa, what I really want from you is 50 pages of analytics reports, right? 50
Me either.
dashboards. Exactly. What they want is my favorite question that this client asked me this question once, and I went, that's it. He said, Philippa, what do I need to know to run my business better?
It's so funny that, like,
Yeah.
this is our first conversation in, like, semi-parallel experiences. We
Right.
had a big client where we delivered I think it was like a 300-page PowerPoint, right? Because
Yeah.
we're researchers and we love the data and we love the story and we love everything that's happening in it. But,
Right.
like, that executive, we were working with someone, and thank God our champion kinda stopped us because we were gonna present to this, like, super high level VP guy. And, he's like, "We cannot show him this." And I'm like, "What do you mean? It's, like, so insightful. There's so many good nuggets of stuff in here." He's like, "He will not even look at this."
Yeah.
So he made us sit down and write a single slide,
Yeah.
and the only parameter of that slide had to be, "And what the hell do we do next?"
Yeah.
And so, like, that's became kind of our signature of, like, our signature one slide, and what are you gonna do about it, right?
Right.
It's a hard lesson, though, for us analytic-y types to learn because we like the data and we find beauty in what we're seeing there, but it does not translate for people like you said, accounting. My husband's an accountant, and every time he talks, I kind of fall asleep
Yeah.
about his job. So, like, we don't have the same they don't have the same appreciation, and that's okay. That's why we get paid.
It's actually, I find it quite liberating because then I don't have to do all those massive reports. I can just say, here, look, here's what you need to know. Right.
Yeah, exactly. And if
But
you wanna know more, I've got a whole swath of
exactly.
data,
Yeah. Yeah.
but, like, we're not gonna go down it until you
Yeah.
ask for it. So
Yeah.
So thinking about all of the incredible people you've had a chance to meet or thought leaders that you follow or people in this space, who is really leading the charge? Who is helping us make sure that the data we're getting is not just noise?
Um, well, actually, you phrased that a little differently when we were doing our pre-talk. So is it okay if I go back to who I was? I mean,
Yeah,
the
heck yeah.
person that I really love to follow and I do read whenever he brings anything out is Guy Kawasaki. So Guy Kawasaki, I'm proud to say, actually endorsed my first book, which came out about 10 years ago. Um, and he lives actually locally to where I live. So you can actually see him out and about. And for those people who don't know, Guy Kawasaki was the Apple evangelist who actually, when Steve Jobs first introduced Apple computers, they didn't go down too well. And
Right.
Guy Kawasaki was the guy who came along and actually made Apple sing. Because Steve Jobs was the techie guy in many, the design guy, but Guy was the marketing and evangelist guy. And now he's the a major investor in Canva, and Canva is his passion. And obviously, Canva is a great way of helping us communicate visually. But he also has this wonderful podcast newsletter called Remarkable People, and he interviews remarkable people. And I
That's
always
cool.
find it very, very interesting. His perspective is very, very interesting. And when he speaks, he's like we've been talking about, have you ever seen him speak?
No, I'm gonna add him to my list for sure.
He, he tells you like, here are the 10 things I'm going to talk about so that when I'm getting to the end. And but everything he says is really sort of pithy. He's a great
Yeah.
speaker.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, so he's the most followed thought leader that I follow.
I love that. And if someone is connecting with you, they want to learn more, they want to grab a copy of your book, where can they find you online?
So believe it or not, I'm actually unique. I don't think there's anybody else in the world with my name. So you can find me on LinkedIn easily, and please do connect. My website is called websitesthatwin.com. And the book is called Website Well, Business Leader's Guide to Driving Real Value from Your Analytics. And of course, you can find that online and at all good booksellers. So thank you.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining me on the Growth Signal. This was a incredibly fascinating conversation.
Thank you.